Speaking of reliability, a podcast with good friends talking with you about reliability engineering topics. Welcome to Speaking of Reliability. This is Fred Schenkelberg.
And this is Chris Jackson, and we're talking about how we visualize progress and challenging reliability and quality engineering activities, especially when they're only part done.
Yeah. And well, I thought the other part that added pressure, and this is a question we got last week. She wrote that I'm a new reliability engineer, and my boss asked me, and this is quotes, an eye-popping, stunning chart that, and then off quote, showing the progress of the activity so far. And so I said, well, what activities have you been doing? And like, well, we've only got partway through an FMEA. And the reason I'm asking is I know that putting the FMEA spreadsheet basically on a chart is not eye-popping. It's it's an eye chart, but it's not useful. And says, well, it's a good call. But I thought, I understand that you just did an FMEA course and was working with people. You've got an FMEA course out there on the site. And have you ever thought about, well, how do you convey the results or the value or the difference it makes once the FMEA is done?
Yeah. So when I finished I was actually on site last week for the course, completing a course with for me as being the subject, and it was received very well. And a lot of people were really very happy with the feedback, especially because I think it's very important when you're teaching a course not to teach the column headings, but let's always focus on why we're doing things and focusing on corrective actions and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a conversation at the end about how do we make this endemic in the organization. And I said, it's really simple. The only way it becomes endemic is when people believe in their bones, like deep inside their instinctive emotions, that a FMEA or any other reliability engineering activity will have a huge return on investment. That is, for every hour you spend on a FMEA or whatever the activity is, you're going to get, save months worth of rework or millions of dollars, or insert extraordinarily large figure there. And one of the comments came when we were starting to sort of work that or brainstorm that concept out, people popping their hands up and said, after this week, I realized that this problem we're currently experiencing almost certainly wouldn't have happened if we did a FMEA properly from the start. And that issue was echoed across the entire classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had to do this 4 times, and because the design wasn't frozen after the design freeze date, but we had required to manufacturers if it was the design was frozen, but it wasn't, and blah blah blah.
Yep.
Just simple things like that, and plenty of other slightly more complex ones.
Yeah,
and I suppose that the difference between knowing, at least theoretically, and knowing something in your bones is this: the theoretical knowledge is that that's a conscious part of your brain, but it's a subconscious part of your brain. The bones is what we refer to it sometimes as. It's where you genuinely believe it to be true without being able to understand why the argument for it being true is valid.
Right.
And those organizations tend not to need to have the huge visuals.
The eye-popping, stunning visuals, yeah.
Right, yeah. And so it's always a challenge, because how do you demonstrate the amount of money you save by preventing a problem when that problem is never allowed to arise in the first place? And then it becomes a brainstorming activity of, well, this would have happened had we not done this. And that's a subjective statement.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes more supportable when that subjective statement is something that you've done in the past. Like, yeah, we routinely make this problem, but now because we routinely make this error, but now because we've done a FMEA, we avoided this error and saved X amount of dollars and Y amount of months or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
But it's always a challenge. And the problem with that too is it often takes the oxygen away from the room of the FMEA activity itself. You spend more time trying to impress people that progress is being made, as opposed to trying to come up with more or better brainstormed ideas to fix things in the first place. It's a long-winded answer to what was a simple question, and I don't think I've ever even come close to answering it because I've just framed the problem as being a difficult one to resolve.
Well, you hit on a point that is the problem was in the question, the person asking it. It's they don't get what FMEA is
Yeah, that's
kind of
true.
the problem. They're saying, well, is this going to make the earth go spin the other way? Let's make it happen. Show us the numbers. Um, I do believe there are ways to demonstrate the value of it without, because it is an investment, right? It is, you have to have a way to either understand intuitively or demonstrate that it does have a value. And avoiding a problem is a perfectly valid way to do it. It's the easiest one by far. Well, let me back up. The first question is, well, what's important to that manager? What's important to that organization?
Hmm.
Why do they want to know the results of the FMEA? So they can brag about it, so they can get promoted, so they can take credit for it, to actually make a difference and make changes. And these are the things that we need to go do. You know, we often talk about testing is, well, what decision are you trying to make? Why do you need that information?
Yeah.
It's the same with, reporting out the results. Is you need to understand the room first. As well, if I go in there and say we avoid 8 problems that are, we solved them earlier versus later, and it costs way less to solve it earlier versus later, is one approach to that. And they all care about, the only thing they care about is time to market. You're talking the wrong language. So if you go in and say the FMEA allowed us to solve problems earlier when it was, like you like to say, Chris, free and easy basically to make the changes, as opposed to the day before we launch and it threatens to delay the program for a month, like it has for the last 6 programs. And the chance of that occurring in this program is significantly reduced. And then once you get a track record doing, when we do FMEAs properly, here's the 6 projects before, and they're all delayed, 1 to 3 months. And here's the 6 afterwards, and only one of them was delayed 3 days. And then you've got pretty hard evidence that, hey, this is making a difference. The hard part is that we usually do more than just an FMEA in a improving a program. But the idea is that there's a story there, but you have to tell the right story.
But the question was about eye-popping graphic, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that's, in FM, and I at first I thought she was talking about like data analysis. I was like, well, put up a CDF of your field, data showing the story. That, I really emphasize that whatever chart you have has got to do 2 things, or 3 things. Is, well, what was the problem? How did this solve that problem or part of that problem? And what was the return? What was the value of solving that problem? And or providing that information or making a better decision, or changing the priority of what you worked on. How did that actually convert into value? And I thought, and don't be afraid to put up a Weibull CDF plot showing before and after you made some changes in the design, because even managers, like I like to say, can understand that plot and
Right.
visualize the difference of it. If you give them 2 MTBF numbers, they think they know what they're looking at, but they have no idea. And
Right.
nobody does either, or very
Yeah.
few people that do. But the idea is that it's got to convey a slide in and of itself is just a vehicle to tell a story. And it's a story of what difference did this make, is usually, why was this problem important? What did we do to solve it? And what were the results? That's kind of my formula for that.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think every problem there's no simple way to illustrate progress. So sometimes a CDF chart can be very, very useful. Sometimes you can actually create that or transform a CDF chart or a CDF plot into a distribution of anticipated warranty costs. So,
Oh yeah, that's what I mean, is that if it's that chart showing, before and after, and the number next to it is the delta that's saying you would have paid an extra $13 million in warranty if we hadn't solved this problem. It's got to, but that value part is got to be related to what's important. It might be reducing time to market. It might be improving customer satisfaction. It might be reducing the failure rate. It might be whatever it is that converts into something of use or value that's perceived as important to the organization. And, if I go off and do a great job in reducing the failure rate, but nobody cares because customers don't ever tell us that they have a problem with the product and we're dominating the market, I was working on the wrong problem.
Right. And yeah, dominating the market. That's always a good one because we're good. We're dominating the market. We're good to go. Well,
No, you're just a target now.
right. A lot of organizations have dominated the market for small periods of time to get there and rest in their laurels. And then it's precious few organizations that are dominating the market and then working out what they need to do to dominate tomorrow's market
Yep.
because
Yeah,
that's
and I don't hear about HB doing AI systems, anymore. And I don't hear about IBM with their. Every now and then they're doing something with a supercomputer, but they're not dominating the server market anymore.
no, that's
It's like, yeah, no, I know what you mean, but it's the the specific challenge is how do you show this for an FMEA? And it's like, well, you got to take those quick wins. And I think in my mind, when I look at the value of an FMEA, one of them is that three ways to do it. One is we prioritize what we're working on so that we don't have competing parts of our organization going after resources that are not the combined thought process of what's the important things that we need to address and solve. So it reduces competition and cross battles and work for that's off target, that's off the priorities. Two is that on some occasions, not always, but on some occasions, you actually discover something in the FMEA that individually we were blind to. Something comes up that's like, oh, that's important. We didn't think about that. Or, and it gets enough traction and it's important to do. So it gets attention and gets solved. And I think the unsaid one in most books is that a well done FMEA aligns the team. They get to know each other's challenges and problems and an understanding of what the mechanical engineers are facing versus the software engineers versus, the other parts of the organization. So that it helps to break down the siloing that occurs in some organizations. And you get some consensus on that.
I was just about to say that's exactly the experience we just had where, we people for the first time in the FMEA understood the sort of functional steps the heart of the system we were looking at goes through to do its thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we had people saying, I never knew that's how it worked. And you go, which is not uncommon because
Right.
everyone's furiously in their own silo. And
Here,
you
you
need to
make
be
this solenoid, you make this get flange, you make this fitting.
right.
And yeah, the architect might has a pretty good idea what's going on, but it's not in the organization. And each individual is making their own decisions within their boundary. But the FMEA opens their eyes to where are the challenges and trade-offs in the rest of the system.
And then we had one instance with a software guy who was in there, who's at the start of the course wondering why he was there.
Yeah.
And then halfway through, he said, "Hey guys, just so you know, the way this thing fails in this way matters to me." And everyone went, "Whoa, never thought of that." And I took a time out from the actual activity we're doing, say, "Hey, this is why we have cross-functional teams." And I made the point of this gentleman saying, "Look, you'll often have people like software guys and manufacturing guys and girls who come in and their pie of relevance seems to be the bigger slice on their pie of relevance seems to be irrelevance. But that single little slice where they're relevant for that conversation could save millions of dollars."
Yep.
And that's why they're there. And we need to make sure they feel like they're part of the effort to make it happen, which they were. And they need to understand that they're there for those little ones and twos, those observations, which will save the day because everyone else is so focused on their thing as well. In fact, when I do my courses, I actually have illustrators who work for me, and we do and everyone says, "Oh, we know what the requirements are, and we know this, we know the specifications." And you go, "That's cool. You know where the spreadsheet is, which has the temperature ranges and everything else. But let's do this." And we created a use case with when the way I do it is I create three personas or three characters. They call
Hmm.
personas. So I'm still using the term personas to represent essentially three different extremes, not too extreme, but just towards the margins of the market segment.
Hmm.
And in one of them, we made quite deliberately. She had multiple sclerosis. She was in a wheelchair, so she's not, not as dexterous as some other users, and she works at a school. Then, and so it's her students who'll be using the device, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all of a sudden, we had these three people. And I actually got my illustrator to draw cartoonish versions of these people to create empathy. And I said, this is all about building empathy with with your customers and users, because you can't empathize with a spreadsheet, nor can you empathize with the customer or user through a spreadsheet. And so
Yep.
we talked about one of them is going to be using the device in more rugged terrains with temperatures, this and that, and everything else. And it follows on from your point about how, for me, especially a system for me, it brings the team together, gets everyone on the same page, everyone knows what's going on, have the software guys make some really cogent observations about everything else and prioritize the effort. But I don't know if we're helping our listener, because that's not easily chartable.
Well, it is. You put the quote on it and put the person's picture on it, and they walked in the room thinking, why am I here? And they made an observation that made this thing worth, it's gold.
Right.
And here's why. And here's what it did.
That's a
And
story. That's
right.
not a graph.
It's always a story, but the chart is, it, it, I, I don't make, as you know, I don't make PowerPoint slides. I got one the other day. It was basically a novel in PowerPoint. And it was like, good grief. Um, but it's put enough on there that you can remember what the story is and have an outline for it. But it is, in order to convey the relevance or the value of something, it is a story that resonates with what's important to the people you're talking to. Otherwise, it's just a chart.
Yeah. And for me, it's always hard for that reason. I mean, field returns are great, much easier to chart as an
Well, yeah, there's
example.
some things that are great and they just lend themselves to it. Failure analysis, a nice picture of the fracture, and the burning silo that it took out. But the
Yeah.
the idea is that I used one chart. I was working with escalators, a team that was maintaining escalators, and they were making some really poor trade-offs and lots of downtime for just because they perceived that they didn't have the money to fix things. And so I finished off my talk with a stock image of a mother and a young child at the base of an escalator, and it was sign that said out of service, and a great big staircase up into nowhere. And they're looking up at the staircase, going, "Oh, we're going to get up there." But
Right.
yeah, and the manager of the maintenance team didn't appreciate that too much because it's like, well, I've been spending the last month in and around your systems, and I saw this more than once. People on crutches trying to navigate stairs because your system's down, waiting for a
Right.
$10 part for 3 months. It just doesn't make sense.
No. And that's important, because it's not about, again, it's not about the engineers. Going back to what I did last week at the start, I had quite a few people say, I don't understand why we're doing this requirement stuff. We're coming up with these three characters as three personas. See, it feels like doubling up.
Hmm.
And every one of them, I got the feedback by the end of the week, said that was one of the best parts of it. So it's and
And
that's
here you thought you were dragging him through the mud, and they liked it.
no, I've been there, done that before with that one. It's the, if you want to build stuff that works, well, you need to know your customer and how they're going to use it. And if something as simple or as turning something which is a two-person lift into a one-person lift, so making something smaller, lighter, and easier to move. Well, that's just on the surface sounds fantastic. But what's one of the main things that happens when you do that? Well, the vibration profiles, all the things they're going to experience are going to be drastically different
Yep.
because heavy things don't get moved as often. And when they get hit by trolleys, usually the trolley bounces off the thing without the thing even knowing it was hit by a trolley,
That's
et
right.
cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They
Yeah.
don't get dropped because it's a two-person lift, which is very deliberate. All right, back, lift your knees, off we go. But when it's a one-person lift, then all of a sudden, people are moving it around when they want to. They're carrying it under their arm when they're trying to do other things. And if it gets hit by the trolley doesn't know that there was a device there anymore, et cetera, et
It
cetera, et
just
cetera.
runs
So
right over it. Yeah.
right, and so the vibration profile is drastically different because it's now being used, in a different way. It's just less robust in one perspective because it's got a smaller mass, and so it's the one. It is a thing that gets bounced as opposed to it being a thing that bounces other things.
Right.
Um, and so it's that's it. That you don't think about that unless you think about those characters or personas, um, and that changes everything in terms of how you're going to focus on vibration and things like that. It's just you could have you could lose your market segment money because what should have been an engineering triumph in terms of making something that was a two-person lift or one-person lift now makes it fundamentally unreliable. And so the perception you get as a company is that you cut corners. It's just not good.
That's not good. Yeah. Well, back to the question is that
This is we say it a few times. All right.
I mean, there's a whole bunch of material in what we just talked about, it is a story and it is what's important to the team and the organization. I mean, there's a variety of ways to show that it's here's the things that I one other thought on this is that FMEA has that potential to one is the alignment one, which is it really takes some creativity to figure out how important that is. Yet a motivated workforce that's working on a common goal with common understanding is invaluable in my mind. It's, working with the design managers and one FMEA did is, and again, it was the software one saying, I don't know why I'm here. My team needs all the resources because we have the biggest problem. And by the 2 hours into it, he came over and said, yeah, that mechanical team is really screwed. I got to give them more credit and stop asking for their money and all that stuff. And I'm like, okay. And in the director of engineering, the guy who was overseeing the whole program, he was standing there and he goes, shook my hand and goes, I didn't think that would be an outcome, but that is, he didn't say it was gold, but that made this whole exercise worth it. And this is, you want to keep going? Because we only have so many donuts, you know?
Yep.
And they did, but sometimes it's a quote. Sometimes it's, well, ask, who's allocating resources and the managers will, what difference are you seeing now? And like this director was like, the software guy's off my back for resources I know he didn't need, now he
Yeah.
understands.
But that's a huge win. Um, but again, going back to the question, how do you come up with that show-stopping graphic? One thing I do if it's an incomplete FMEA is have a picture of your thing, put a dirty great big pie chart on the top, and show the slice of this is a percentage of the system we've done, starters.
Yep.
And
There
then
you go. That's
say,
an idea.
yep. And then say after that, um, what does that mean in terms of money or whatever the story? Say, okay, from this slice and this slice alone, we've done this. We believe we've prevented X million dollars being, all that stuff. You might be
Right.
able to chart that bit, but then talk about that single slice and then have that slice then become the impetus for us
To do the next round
keep
of
doing.
FMEAs, the next,
Right.
you did a system one, now you do a design one, you do a critical component piece or whatever. But we don't do FMEAs just for the fun of it. And it's got to have some perceptible return. And that story has to come out. And sometimes it's a quote. I like the pie chart part because you can show results we've done a quarter of, what we're planning on doing. And here's the results we got already. Here's
Right.
the difference it's made. Here's the evidence. Here's a quote, or here's the whatever it is. And
Hmm.
but it's um, just as long. And my last comment on this, and we should wrap it up, is just don't use every whiz bang feature that you can put on a PowerPoint slide. No bouncing checks, rotating letters, fireworks in the background and stuff. That might be eye popping, but it's just distraction. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
No, that's exactly right. It's and sometimes the more stuff you have dilutes your key message.
Yep. Yeah. Keep it simple and on point. This is what, I call them value slides. This is what the value of doing this activity.
Hmm.
Whether it's a proposal or results, it's a similar story, but you need to understand the room and what's important. Those kinds of things really are the starting point. Anyway, yeah, FMA is a tough one. It really, and she was dead on. Don't show a picture of the spreadsheet, that fits to one slide. It doesn't matter how big your wall is. It's just not going to be, it's not going to tell a story at all.
Right. Unless it's a joke, in which case that's okay.
Yeah. But the idea is that we do need to regularly think about, well, how do we convey, what we did and why we did it, and to what extent, what results. And it's FMEA is just one of the many activities we get involved in. So it's kind of diving in the deep end of the pool as a brand new reliability engineer. But you got to get used to it. Is how do you convey this stuff and do it? Now, if you're listening to this and you've got some ideas of how you've conveyed or transmitted the eye-popping, stunning charts to convey the value of an FMEA activity, let us know. We came up with all kinds of different things, but it's hard to know unless we're in that particular organization. But maybe you have some tips or ideas that we didn't think of. We'd like to hear about those. Or if you've got a question about whatever method or activity or stuff you're working on, let us know. As you know, I always ask for your input and questions, and really we've been getting quite a few. So it's been rather fun getting back to people and having discussions, but also having topics here for the show. So if you've got a question, head over to accendoreliability.com/go/SOR. You can find a couple of ways to get in touch with us. Chris and I and the other hosts of the show are available through LinkedIn, where I do seem to get most of my questions, that at least that come to me. And also we are available through our about pages on Accendo. There's plenty of ways to get in touch with us. So we do look forward to hearing from you. So Chris, it's good to know that your course last week went well and made progress on a couple different fronts, it sounds like. So that's cool.
Mm-hmm. No, it was good. It's a worthwhile activity. Very tiring, but all around good outcome.
Good. Well, I'm glad it worked out. All right. Well, I'll talk to you soon, Chris. Maybe you need to take a nap now. I'm talking about working too hard last week.
Not wrong.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Cheers, Fred.
Thanks for listening to Speaking of Reliability. We invite you to join the conversation. If you have a question or a topic that you think we should discuss in a future show, please let us know. You can find a comment box below the episode show notes, or just leave a note as part of a review on iTunes.